break, rolling blackouts are leading to food and water shortages throughout Cuba. We examine the humanitarian crisis and get a historical perspective coming up next. Cuba is in the midst of a worsening humanitarian crisis. The U.S. oil blockade imposed on the island nation, leading to rolling blackouts across the country. In January, President Donald Trump signed an executive order imposing new tariffs on countries that directly supply oil to Cuba. Cuba's national electric grid has collapsed at times. Food is scarce, water systems are running dry, and Cubans face a severe health crisis. For more on the latest with Cuba and its relations with the United States, we are joined now by Pegasus professor at the University of Central Florida, Dr. Luis Martínez-Fernández. Dr. Martínez-Fernández, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Can you describe for our audience what life is like right now for Cubans at this point, with reports of complete, total rolling blackouts, rotting food in the streets, hospitals shutting down, shortages of food, lots of unrest?
Yes, with the exception of a few moments during the history of the Cuban Revolution, the Cuban economy has been in crisis. Foreign powers, beginning with the Soviet Union and later Venezuela, were able to prop the country up. But what we're seeing today is the rock bottom. The economy has come to a standstill. Food, which has never been abundant, is far scarce. Energy, people are cooking with wood rather than gas or electricity. There are blackouts that last for, I think the last one lasted for 3 days. Even water is scarce because the pumps require energy, fuel. So at the bottom of this, although there are many different factors, we find a crisis of fuel. And the Cuban government declared, and I saw this on TV, the Cuban government declared that they have no fuel. And if you have no fuel, everything else is paralyzed.
Can you summarize for our audience your perspective on what has caused this worsening crisis? Do you believe it's all because of the fuel embargo?
The fuel embargo is just one factor. There are many others that have been in place for a long time. Structural problems, for example, the fact that there are no incentives for people to be productive. That's one of them. Secondly, a demoralized leadership. Even though Raúl Castro is still alive, we see a newer generation. No spring chickens, however, they're in their 60s. A newer generation of leadership which really flaunts its wealth and is tone deaf towards the needs of the Cuban people. The other factor is the Trump administration's hardening of its position on Cuba, trying to weaken the regime to the point that it collapses. This includes an oil embargo, but actually it's an oil blockade, not physical, but it's an oil blockade. Cubans on the island have been calling the embargo a blockade for decades. It has not been a blockade until now. What other factors? Of course, the fact that Cuba's benefactor, Venezuela, is no longer providing the country with all types of support, mainly fuel. I would say that those 4 or 5 factors explain why Cuba has hit rock bottom and why the regime is not likely to survive.
Now, protests are rare in Cuba. They broke out recently when the CIA director visited the island to reportedly try to help manage this crisis. What impact do you believe his visit had or has had and is having currently on Cubans?
Well, Cubans are so desperate that any solution that brings down the Diaz-Canel regime is welcome. Believe it or not, I've seen some images and video of graffiti in Cuba streets saying "Thank you, Trump," and things like that. That kind of thing, that form of protest, graffiti, was very, very rare. Um, Likewise, street protests, those were very rare. We have the exception of July of 2021 when massive protests broke out throughout the country. But what we're seeing today are more localized protests, mainly at night, men and women banging pots and pans, not just calling for electricity, but calling for the end of the regime.
Do you have any more thoughts on the future right now? What's the hope for Cuba? I mean, this is just such a dire situation.
When it comes to Cuba, it's hard to prognosticate. And I've been burned once or twice in the past. What I can tell you is that for the reasons I mentioned earlier, the Cuban regime is at its most vulnerable position from its revolutionary history. I don't see it surviving. I thought that it would be a matter of weeks and months, but the war in Iran has sort of postponed whatever actions may have been planned for Cuba. Keep in mind that Marco Rubio, who's a Cuban American, staunch anti communist, has some influence on the president. So that is yet another factor that explains to me that the days of the regime are counted. Maybe the weeks of the regime or the month of the regime are counted, but I don't see it surviving much longer.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today with your insight, Dr. Luis Martinez-Fernandez.
Thank you very much.
On our